Was George Washington a slave owner? So will George Washington now lose his status? Are we going to take down, excuse me, are we going to take down statues to George Washington? How about Thomas Jefferson? What do you think of Thomas Jefferson? You like him?
I do love
Okay, good. Are we going to take down the statue? Because he was a major slave owner. Now we're going to take down his statue. So you know what? It's fine. You're changing history. You're changing culture.
This morning, President Trump tweeted, "Sad to see the history and culture of our great country being ripped apart with the removal of our beautiful statues and monuments. You can't change history, but you can learn from it. Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, who's next? Washington, Jefferson, so foolish. Also, the beauty that is being taken out of our cities, towns, and parks will be greatly missed and never able to be comparably replaced." Of course, every Confederate statue could be replaced by a statue to a soldier or a distinguished general who actually fought in battle for the United States of America instead of against the United States of America. There are hundreds of war heroes on the Union side of the Civil War or World War II who have never been recognized with statues in the United States. Veteran journalist Bill Moyers is a son of the South. He was born in Oklahoma. He grew up in Marshall, Texas. He later worked in politics and government, serving both in the Kennedy and Johnson administrations. He was a special assistant to President Lyndon Johnson. When the president signed the Civil Rights Act in July of 1964, on the day Donald Trump was inaugurated, Bill Moyers said this about Donald Trump's original political lie, the lie about President Obama's birth.
He rode to power on the wings of a dark lie, one of the most malignant and ugly lies in American history. We must never forget it.
Joining us now, Bill Moyers, Peabody Award-winning journalist. He served as President Johnson's press secretary from 1965 to 1967. Bill, there are so many things I want to cover with you, but I want to just start with, you're someone who had that job, press secretary. You stood at that podium here, in that briefing room. What is it like for you when you watch what happens in that room now, that room that was a sacred place for you?
Well, it was a sacred place, but we committed a lot of sins.
Sure.
In that sacred place. We were not perfect. Now, I was not a perfect press secretary. Lyndon Johnson was not a perfect president when it came to disclosing to the press. But he never asked me to lie. Sometimes I lied, I'm sure, in contradicting something that he had said or I had said. But when I became press secretary, against my will, my father sent me a telegram. He's an everyday working man in East Texas, a Baptist deacon. He sent me a telegram saying, "Bill, tell the truth if you can, but if you can't tell the truth, don't tell a lie." Yeah. And that's what I tried to do. But as I've often joked, our credibility was so bad we couldn't believe our own leaks. Today, I'm not saying we were better than they were by any means, but we made an effort not to deliberately deceive the public. And now it's just one lie coming out after another. I don't believe they have the capacity or the freedom under this president to speak the truth.
You struggled with the first presidency in the modern age that was embattled in an unpopular war, which is what made all of your struggles in that briefing room were pretty much all about that. This is a different struggle that we're seeing. This is a president who is the struggle. The White House staff struggle is with the president himself.
You know, Lawrence, when doing the campaign last year, I kept thinking that Donald Trump has given a big bullhorn to some of the most malevolent furies in American life. I've now decided he is the malevolent fury. Somebody said today he has to get away from himself. He can't get away from himself. This man does not seem to me to have what we would normally think of as a soul. He has an open sore. Everything antagonizes him. He's constantly at war with everybody, and he degrades everything around him. He is the malevolent fury that is attempting to provide a return to many of the practices and behaviors that we have spent 250 years overcoming.
You worked for a Southern president who signed the Civil Rights Act and knew politically when he was doing it and said,
he said
privately to you, no doubt,
he said
what this would cost him.
Yeah, he said that evening, I think we've just delivered the South to the Republican Party for my lifetime and yours. What he meant by that is that for 100 years, the Democrats had been the protector of slavery, the defender of slavery, and of white power. Now, with the vote coming, the Democrats would move away from that, and the Republicans would fill the gap. There would be a white flight to the Republican Party, and there was. The Republican Party became the party that promotes racism and white power in American politics today.
The president went from a couple of days ago saying Confederate monuments are a local decision. Local communities should decide whether they want them or not want them. Now, today, he's decided they are absolute national treasures. We must never touch them, and we can never possibly build any statues as beautiful as those again to replace them.
The paradox is, I mean, we've done that at my alma mater, the University of Texas. The Confederate statues have been moved to a museum, as in fact they should have been. But the paradox in what the president is saying is that most of the statues we're talking about were built after, constructed, erected after 1900, around the time that Jim Crow laws, the laws of enforcing segregation, were established, and the terrorism that became Jim Crow was beginning to be enacted against blacks. It was not to honor the soldiers of the Civil War. It was to remind blacks and whites that the force of the state would still be used to subjugate them to a different form of slavery. All of those could come down without affecting history at all. And you could put them in the museums where teachers and doyens could explain why they were put up in the early part of the 1900s.
But just that erraticism on his part from a couple of days ago, it's a local matter, which is kind of a safe, relatively safe political thing to say, to now coming out today and saying, oh, no, they must all be saved. I mean, this is, how is the country supposed to follow a president like that?
By looking at the consistency of his inconsistency. This is a man who is unable to finish a sentence in the way he obviously intended it when he started.
Yeah.
Lyndon Johnson was a man of contradictions. Lyndon Johnson could be as perplexing as Donald Trump was. But Lyndon Johnson knew what he was doing. He knew government. He loved government. He knew how to make it work. And he also knew that if you continually contradicted yourself the way Trump is doing, as Johnson would do later in Vietnam, you're destroying yourself. And I think that's what's happening with Donald Trump, is he's destroying himself, except with that 1/3 of the electorate that thinks he can do no harm.
I want to take a look at some stunning magazine covers that came out today from around the world. We have The Economist, which shows Donald Trump basically blowing into a bullhorn that is looks like a Ku Klux Klan hood. Time magazine came out with one today that also puts him in the position of giving sort of a Hitler salute with the American flag. We have a couple of others, but these are things. This is a kind of coverage we have never seen in this country.
Right. You know, the saddest part to me of Charlottesville, other than the death and the injury that occurred, was the fact that in fact, I saw this on NBC News last night, the nightly news. There's a synagogue there, the Beth Israel Synagogue. About 40 or 50 people come regularly to worship. And during the troubles down there last weekend, 3 men armed with automatic rifles stood across from the synagogue, eyeing it suspiciously. Parades of young men came by with swastikas. They'd say, "There's the synagogue. Sieg Heil, Sieg Heil." This comes from the rabbi,
yes.
Zimmerman, who told this story on the NBC last night. And they were carrying the swastika, the Nazi flag. And I cannot understand how anyone today can march under or salute the Nazi flag without recognizing what the Nazi regime did to Europe, to the world, and particularly to 6+ million Jews who were rounded up, murdered, sent to concentration camps, starved to death, buried alive. And that's what that swastika flag means to those Jewish congregants in that synagogue who watched them come by saluting Adolf Hitler.
Before we go to this break, I just want to get a word in you, as a Southerner, to Southerners, about these Confederate monuments. I mean, they watch people like me, Northerners from Boston who couldn't care less about these monuments, talk about them and want to see them removed. You supported them being removed from your alma mater's campus. What would you say as a Southerner to Southerners about these monuments and what they mean now?
That is not your heritage. Your heritage is different from what happened under slavery. Your heritage now, all of you are free. White and black are free. And these monuments are a time, you said it very well when you began this discussion. You know, George Washington risked his life to lead an army whose mission was to create the United States of America. Thomas Jefferson risked his life by writing the Declaration. Both were slave owners. George Washington freed his slaves. Jefferson didn't. But the statues are commemorating men who fought in and led armies designed to destroy the United States of America. And I would say to everybody today, the Civil War failed. It did not destroy this union, but the losers kept fighting until they're still fighting today. Let them go. You lost the war. Let's move on.
We're going to be right back with more from Bill Moyers.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.